Hi, I'm Elizabeth Jones, and I'm going to share a bit about my writing journey and my award-winning book, A Dark Iris. I certainly loved books from the start. I was lucky to have them all around me because my parents, being teachers, were passionate readers. My parents both liked to write fiction. In fact, my father had stories published in later life. So I think writing is very much in my genes. Every year in the very feudal English village where I grew up, there was a flower show. For some reason, children were invited to submit essays on something related to nature. When I was 6, I wrote about a goldfinch nest in our garden and it got first prize. I was inordinately proud of that. When I was a bit older, I liked to write what I thought was brilliant poetry, but which later I realised was the most dreadful doggerel. In high school, I adored literature and loved to write academic essays and occasionally stories. Then I attended the University of East Anglia, where I had a great time studying works of literature and writing about them. But it wasn't until I came to Bermuda I thought of writing professionally and of writing novels. At the age of 7 or 8, I remember being hooked on the classic Heidi. I loved it because it was written from a girl's point of view, but also because it was rooted in a place I had never seen. Heidi loved where she lived and was in tune with natural beauty. I could picture the Swiss mountains she so loved. I made up my mind that one day I would write a novel for children about a place I loved. It never occurred to me that that place would be a little island in the Atlantic, that it would be Bermuda. So that was my first inspiration for A Dark Iris. While at university, I met the love of my life, Mike Jones. When he told me he was from Bermuda, I had absolutely no idea where the island was. But 3 years later, we wanted to marry. He was working in Bermuda, so I followed my heart, left England, and joined him in January 1973, not knowing whether I'd be able to work or where we would live. 46 years later, now I can't imagine living anywhere else. But in 1973, that childhood ambition to write a children's book had faded from my mind. I just knew I wanted to use my English degree and teach. For a few months, I was unemployed. During this time, the assassinations of the governor and his ADC happened. I was very ignorant of Bermuda's history, so I could not readily understand the underlying reasons for those events. In the September of 1973, I was so lucky to be given a temporary position at the high school, the Berkeley Institute, because there, in just a few months, I learned from Bermudian colleagues and students more about Bermuda than other expatriates knew after 20 years of living on the island. It was Chained to the Rock that introduced me to the story of Sally Bassett and Beck. Nearly 40 years later, I wanted to fulfill my dream of writing a YA novel about Bermuda. It seemed to me very important I should not insult my young readers by prettifying the island and omitting politically and socially harsh realities. So I decided to set it in the turbulent years of the 1970s, a period I vividly remember because it was all so new to me. Since so much of Bermudian life has been affected by issues relating to race and colonialism, it would be perverse to bypass them. But there was another inspiration. I had the good fortune to participate in Sharon Wilson's art class. Sharon taught this wonderful technique of using an eraser to rub out charcoal dust to create darks and lights. I remember screaming, really embarrassing, because suddenly the lemons I was supposed to be creating began to emerge from their hiding place in the paper. Driving home after the class, the idea of using art as a device to reveal the secrets of history came to me. And then I remembered my ambition to write a story for young adults about a place I love. I knew then, without a doubt, the story would be set in Bermuda and that the heroine would be a Bermudian girl with a very deep passion for painting and drawing. And so Rebecca was born. As I've said, I set my novel in the turbulent early 70s when I first arrived, but I also wanted her visions and paintings to reveal a new twist on the story of Sally Bassett and Beck. Bermudians would refer to a hotter than usual day as a Sally Bassett day. When I asked why, I was told that a woman of that name had been burnt at the stake for inducing her granddaughter Beck to poison her slave owners and another slave, Nancy. He never told me much more than that. Then I read about the court records enchained on the rock. Beck's evidence was key to convicting Sally. The general stance, I think, is that Sally was worried because Beck was approaching womanhood and would therefore be at risk from the sexual attentions of Thomas Forster, the slave master. The mystery is, why was Nancy also poisoned? Well, there's a theory she was Forster's lover and that Beck wanted to take her place. I have no evidence to believe or disbelieve about that, but my gut is against it. I've always felt sympathy with children trapped in an adult world and so vulnerable to corruption. That's why Dickens' novels always appeal to me. The focus of the oral legend has always been more on Sally. I needed Rebecca to be drawn into a story from the past as she follows her rite of passage into adult awareness. But I felt Rebecca would relate more to Beck, given they are both grappling with events and situations put into motion by adults. I thought Rebecca would have a clearer insight into the horrors of slavery if she saw them from Beck's point of view. Rebecca would see that whatever the truth behind the poisonings, Beck, like so many children, in both past and present, was certainly a victim of adult exploitation, and that insight would be an important part of her transition. I wanted Rebecca, through her art, to be a kind of griot, and that meant she had to have a revelation of something previously unknown. It seemed to me entirely possible Sarah, Foster, and Sally could collude. Sarah because of her violent husband and because of Nancy's relationship with him, and Sally because she wanted to protect her granddaughter. Our national flower is the Bermudiana, otherwise known as a purple iris. Legend has it that after Sally burned, a purple iris grew in her ashes. But I also wanted the idea of an all-seeing eye, that of the lady of the library. At one point, Rebecca sees her eye through the keyhole of her apartment before Rebecca actually meets her in person. The artistic eye is significant where Rebecca is concerned, as it is through her visions and paintings and drawings we see scenes from the past. Perhaps, too, there's a hint of Mrs. Forster's ghostly evil eye, preventing Rebecca from keeping her drawings of the young Beck, in the library, for example, when the drawing blows up. Once I had the notion of using art as a device, it fell into place that my protagonist would be a driven artist. When the idea of writing about Beck and Sally Bassett came to me, I knew I wanted my main character to be a Bermudian girl and that the book would be from her point of view. I also knew that through vision she would be confronted with man's inhumanity to man in chilling ways. I drew on how I felt when I was first told about genocide and warfare. I remembered an occasion when a female student came to me one day, distraught by the horrors of the political situation in South Africa. It was also important to me for Bermuda's natural beauty to be revealed through Rebecca's eyes. Rebecca is not based on any real person. That said, I think I have imbued her with some of the strength, sweetness, and honesty of character I noticed in many of the high school girls I taught when I first came to Bermuda. She definitely grew in character as I wrote the novel. It has to be Rebecca. As well as being so gifted, she is fundamentally serious, caring, and sensitive without being a prig, and she is loyal. I have to admit to being very fond of Rebecca, which is why I'm trying to write a sequel. I'm not ready to give up on her yet. But I'm also very attached to her art teacher, Mr. Leopold Everard Stowe, and to the lady of the library, who is maddening, but who at the end of the day has Rebecca's best interests at heart. I had fun creating the lady of the library with all her spying gadgetry. I don't have just one favourite part, but one part particularly appeals to the child in me. I like the section where Rebecca is being criticised by all her teachers, ironically by the art teacher in particular. Her father unexpectedly turns up and defends her to the hilt. It's the kind of support every child dreams of but rarely gets in my experience. I also like the scene where she meets John Peterson in Admiralty House grounds and has a vision of Beck. I hope young Caribbean readers will learn something of Bermuda's history and culture and compare and contrast it with their own. I would love my novel to provoke thought and discussion on a few questions, such as, what effect does the past have on the present? How does our present affect our interpretation of the past? Why must a child's special talent be nurtured, and who is most responsible for nurturing it? How can we best overcome social and political injustice? I told you about my childhood love for Heidi. That book made me want to visit Switzerland, which I have done many, many times over the course of my life. So I hope very much my book will inspire Caribbean readers to one day visit our beautiful island.